On today's episode, we revisit our pre-season predictions. We also take a look at some of the free agents that are still yet to sign and what to do for Carlton in terms of coaching. All that and more on today's episode of Zero Hanger TV. All right, so straight off the bat, we're going to revisit some of our crystal ball pre-season predictions. Yep. Didn't think I'd have to face up to some of these, but we're going to take a look at them now because we're midway through the season. So we're going to start with the Premiers. So I had Melbourne, obviously no bias at all. I had Melbourne as Premiers, and you had...
I had Brisbane. We actually both had the same two clubs as far as a grand finalists would go. So I had the Lions beating the D's, you had the D's beating the Lions, and as you mentioned, no bias from your end whatsoever from a D's fan. You'd have to think those two clubs, along with Collingwood and Port Adelaide, are still in that top bracket. I guess recent results for Brisbane, a little bit of a blip. Melbourne were absolutely fantastic in the King's birthday game. So you'd still take, I think, those two, along with, as we mentioned, Collingwood and Port Adelaide in that top four. So for now, I think we can say on track to an extent.
Still comfortable with it. Yeah. So now we'll take a look at some of the awards. So obviously we predicted the Brownlow, Coleman and some AA Smokies. So Brownlow, who did you have for the Brownlow?
I had Clary. Obviously some time off probably hasn't helped his chances. I think he's probably still behind the likes of Christian Petrarca, Mark Bontempelli, Nick Dacos, Zach Butters potentially. Hasn't had a bad season, but kind of a solid season from I guess, Clary's standards. He's always kind of been in that top 5, top 10 for the Brownlow in the last few years, and you probably still could be about there. I think you had Touk Miller.
I did have Touk, yeah.
Yeah, we'll get to some of the ones we got wrong in a sec, but probably just unfortunate through injury. I think we had a few people actually tipping Touk, but Clary had the most votes from our team.
Yep.
And then for the Coleman, I had Jeremy Cameron, who... somewhat on track. I think what Charlie Kerner has taken the lead with that extra game in hand, but you'd think he might still be favourite Jezza. So that was a couple we got right. And then as you mentioned, we both had some All-Australian Smokies. I'll be happy to say I had Nick Martin. Whether he actually makes it right now at the moment for a wing spot remains to be seen. I had also tipped that there might actually be wingers on the wings for the All-Australian side this season. Whether that remains to be true, we'll wait and find out. Josh Dacos certainly ahead of him. You had Cozzy Pickett.
I did have Cozzy. Probably not. I wouldn't put him in there at the moment.
He's certainly not far off, at least from like a squad selection, I would think, in that kind of 44-man squad. From his small forwards, he's probably behind a few like Rankin. Charlie Cameron, Isaac Rankin, Tom Papley's popped up here and there. Toby Green's been absolutely fantastic. So he's probably in that second or third tier from a positional standpoint. But second half of the year, we know what Cozzy can do. And like I said, I don't think you're out of the race for that one at all.
Absolutely. So now the more fun side was
what
we got wrong.
Stuff that everyone wants to kind of know what we got wrong. So I think the big one, I think we both had Carlton in our top 8. Currently bottom 4. I don't think that was one that a lot of people probably had right, having Carlton outside of at least the top 8. Many people, I think, had them kind of coming in one of those return clubs. I also had Sydney, I think Fremantle, Richmond. So some of these clubs that are still well in a chance for a top 8 spot, as Carlton are. Yeah. But I think some of the clubs like Port Adelaide didn't have.
I think neither of us had Port Adelaide.
A bit of a surprise to the Power. I don't think I had them in my top 8, let alone in the premiership hunt at this point of the season. So credit to Ken Hinkley and his side, and then I guess a few others as well to kind of go off. Pies missing the top 8. That was.
I did have the Pies missing the top 8. I just didn't think they'd be able to do it. I thought there was going to be maybe some second-year blues for Fly, but turns out not. They just rode that momentum so far, and they're looking pretty good. Tough loss on the King's birthday game, but they're not in a bad spot. They'll take the bye and they'll come back pretty strong. Yeah,
I'll admit, I think I might have had them in that second half of the top 8. Might not have had them top 4. But one of the form teams of the competition. So, I'll chalk that one down to a 50-50 at some extent. Now, we both had the Hawks winning the Spoon. I think, again, maybe one a majority of people might have had, but with how West Coast season's gone so far, it's going to be pretty hard to see them.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody predicted the level of downfall that West Coast was going to have.
Yeah, successive seasons. I think a few people probably have them a bit closer maybe to the top 8, but at least Hawthorn or North Melbourne were the 2 favourites for the Spoon, and so far it's the Eagles out in front for that award they don't really want.
Yep. And the last one, I think we had the traditional grand final bounce.
Yeah.
And you got this one.
Yeah, this is one of the ones where we thought, will we see it, won't we see it? While we haven't got a confirmation yet, all signs kind of point to Andrew Dillon hoping for a 2:30 p.m. bounce. And obviously, Gill's still in charge. It's his final year. Who knows what he'll throw up? But a traditional bounce time sounds about right. And I thought we maybe would sway away from that in Gill's final year. But like I said, it's looking likely that they'll be keeping the 2:30 p.m. time slot.
Yep. All right. So, there's a lot of things that could still come our way towards the end of the year.
Yeah. Not sure Ben Brown will win the Coleman.
I don't think Ben Brown's going to win the Coleman at this point. That's a bad one on me. But, let's see. We've still got second half of the year to play out. So, we'll see. All right. So, moving on, we have Carlton. So, they're in a lot of trouble. I don't think, as we said, nobody predicted them bottom four. So what are we to do with Carlton in terms of the coaching department? I mean, traditionally they want to sack the coach, obviously, but I don't think that's the right time. It's the right time to do that.
I still think I would be surprised if Michael Voss wasn't coaching round 1 2024, contracted for next year, and you're not going to get anyone from the club coming out and saying anything bad up until the day he gets sacked. That's kind of how it works. Everyone's going to say he's got a contract to see out. We're backing him in, and then eventually, when someone is on the chopping block, that's when that tide kind of turns. But I honestly don't see them looking at sacking another coach after, I guess, since Mick Malthouse came in, and then that was followed by Brendan Bolton, David Teague, and Michael Voss, the next one to come in and try and fix these things. So I'd be surprised. Obviously, I'm probably more surprised that they're in the bottom four at the middle of the season. And as we mentioned earlier in the show, we probably had them as a top 8 side, potentially even a top 4 side. We mentioned, I think only a few weeks ago, that they've probably got on paper the best list. The issues for them, I guess, across the last 6 or so games when they haven't really been able to chalk up a win is initially it came down to maybe some of their decision making on field from the players with ball movement, particularly in that forward half, and not really finding a weakness in their opposition and really struggling to be penetrable against an opposition defence. Then more lately, it's probably become a matter of effort. I think we saw the tackle numbers they had and the amount of players that didn't record a tackle or had one or less tackles for the game against Essendon. So that's also been brought in, and now there's I guess across the whole period there's certainly been questions over Michael Voss, but certainly hasn't helped that there's other things going on at board level above him, and there's always going to be pressure. He's 30-odd games into his tenure. I think he's still got a better record than what David Teague and Brendan Bolton had at this time. Like I said, I'd love for him to just see out the season. I wouldn't think that they would be making any off-season cuts. And obviously a big question comes into, if they are to cut, who are they looking for? And there's always, I guess, some discussion in people saying that, well, no one's out there, no one's about, and at times that can be true, but you just have to look at someone like Craig McRae, who was an untried coach, got that option. The thing is, though, for the Blues, they'd be wanting someone with experience. Michael Voss had it, and it still hasn't worked in that case, just like it didn't happen with Nick Malthouse, but who's out and available with experience? Damien Hardwick's one that'll be thrown up. Ken Hinckley's future still bit of a question mark, and all of that, certainly going to be in consideration only if they sack Michael Voss this year or at the end of this year. So a lot to play out, but I would like to see him coaching round 1 2024.
Yeah, you don't want to see them sack another coach. It just seems too cyclical. It seems like we've been talking about it every 2 years, essentially.
Bit of a cycle.
All right, so we're moving on to the rookie rankings now. So a little bit of movement. There's a new name in the rookie rankings. Definitely not someone that's flown under the radar, though. He's had a really strong start to his debut.
Yeah, the Wardlaw, George Wardlaw. Absolutely fantastic 4 games. Now, it particularly maybe at this point of the season and further, 4 games probably won't get you into our top 7. But what he's been able to do since coming straight in, hasn't got a win yet, but working under Brett Ratton, he's just absolutely flourished. Now, there's no LDU in there. He's been without Jai Simpkin as well, and he's been working alongside the likes of Will Phillips, Harry Sheasel, and he's just been among some of North Melbourne's best. He comes into number 6, so he comes ahead of Seamus Mitchell, who returned this week against Brisbane, had a strong game, 21 touches, but he'll just fall back one spot, just given how good Wardlaw has been. And then coming, at 5, we've got Max Michaelani. He's probably fallen a couple of spots No, not too much through a fault of his own. I just think, Ruben Jimby, who's now at 4, has been really strong and was really strong against Adelaide despite a 20-goal loss. Bailey Humphrey at 3 had the bye this week, but it's just been exceptional. Particularly his last, I think, 4 games, he's averaging over 20 touches and a goal a game, which is stellar numbers for any AFL player, let alone a first-year player. And our top 2 still hasn't moved. Ashcroft at 2, Harry Sheasel at 1. Could get pretty tight, I guess, again in the coming weeks, but particularly with Ashcroft already having his bye. So when the Roos have theirs, he could be ready to pounce into the top spot for the first time.
Yeah, they're building some nice young talent there over at North. Really exciting time for them.
Very good.
Honourable mention, so Judd McVee had a pretty strong game.
His numbers didn't blow off the page, but I thought he was just real balanced. Such a good asset for them in that back line that really flourished against Collingwood. So he's one that gets a little bit of a tick of approval. But the one I want to talk about, Matt Johnson, I think quite interesting. He hasn't probably been in the top 7 just yet this year. Obviously, they had the bye the week before their game against Richmond, and I think he had about 24, 25 touches against the Tigers on Saturday night as one of their best. So when our rookie rankings expand to 8, so a top 8 at the end of the byes, he'll probably be one that's right in there for that void.
Yep. Interesting stuff. All right, so moving ahead we're going to take a look at some of the free agency players now that haven't signed. We're about midway through the season. Probably the biggest name on that list is Harry Himmelberg.
Yeah, he's one that's, I guess, a lot of talk's gone up over the last week or so. So there's reports that tie him to Collingwood, Richmond, Sydney, and even Brisbane. So he's not going to be short on suitors, and that's including GWS, who confirmed, I think it was last week, that they're ready to table, or they're going to table, or might have already tabled a pretty decent deal from a, I guess, years perspective. You're looking at about 5 years for him, and he'll be on some pretty good coin, I think, from what they might be able to offer, talking 600 plus at least. So maybe even 700, 800K a year. As mentioned, he won't be short of suitors either. So the Pies could be coming. Richmond, I think he'd suit probably the best out of those kind of keen clubs. Sydney across town, similar. They need a defender, but they also might need someone to swing forward every now and then. So, he's one that's going to get plenty of talk, I think, across the coming months if they don't have a contract signed yet.
All right, now we have some 2 high-value Bombers players as well, looking at their free agency options.
Yeah, so Dusty Parish, Mason Redmond, 2 guys off contract, restricted free agents. And I think they probably could be worth the same amount of value. Now, the Bombers will probably look at Redmond as a priority retention player, just given his role he plays for Brad Scott, his form in 2023. He's been absolutely exceptional. And some interest probably from South Australia that will probably enter a bidding war and push his price up. Dusty Parish also likely to get some rival interest, but you'd think that the Bombers are also kind of okay with where they sit with their midfield group. They'd love to retain him, obviously, but probably just at the right price, and they'd look to do so.
Yep. And Northern Saints also have some players there.
Yeah, so Ben Mackay at North Melbourne, another restricted free agent. Jay Gresham at St Kilda falls under the same band, so those 2 as well. I think they're kind of going in different ways on their form at the moment. Now, Ben Mackay was touted as a potential 800K defender pre-season, and Port Adelaide is said to be one of some interested suitors. Whether he's reached that yet, I'm not sure, but his recent form is probably steering toward some of his best footy, where Jay Gresham's values might be going the other way. Hasn't probably had that contract year that he'd be hoping for, which it might work in St Kilda's favour if they'd look to retain him. Wouldn't be paying as much as they might have thought they would need to, and he's still got potential, I think, to be a great half-forward midfield option for the Saints.
Yeah, and a couple of guys that are sort of struggling to crack into the team, but still pretty high value. So James Jordan, Dylan Williams.
Yeah, so James Jordan played a lot of VFL footy this year, has been playing some AFL footy more recently. That might be just because Clayton Oliver's out though, so he's probably more accustomed to VFL football this year. He's certainly an AFL standard footballer. His first couple of seasons with the D's, he was pretty much playing consistent footy, sometimes as a sub, yes. His first season, he was absolutely fantastic in that 2021 campaign when they won the grand final. So I'd like to think that a club that probably needs some reinforcement for their midfield might look towards someone like James Jordan. While the D's would love to retain him as well. They've done a fantastic job of re-signing some of their players throughout the last 12 months, and he'd certainly be one of the next ones on their list. And the other one you mentioned, Dylan Williams. So just like Jordan, he was delisted and redrafted as a rookie on Port Adelaide's list. So that actually makes him eligible, no matter how long he's been in the system for, eligible as a free agent. So not that there might be much of a chance that he actually leaves Port Adelaide. It's just an interesting one to see how that might stand, and given that nothing's been signed at this point in the year.
Yeah. And to finish off, a couple of interesting names here. So Jeremy McGovern and Luke Shuey.
Yeah, so two more free agents. There's always going to be a lot of talk, I think, over the coming months about West Coast and what they're doing with some of their star talent, both contracted and uncontracted. Now, McGovern and Shuey are 2 free agents. And look, there was talks months ago that McGovern's deal was done. Nothing's been announced from West Coast yet, so some question there. But if they are going to be looking at potentially parting ways with some of their more expensive senior talent to blood some younger talent and get some, either whether it's picks in, obviously compensation from a free agent perspective can always be a bit up and down, particularly with 2 guys at their age, but there'd certainly be 2 names, which is surprising given you've got McGovern, who's said to be re-signed, but nothing yet from the club, and Luke Shuey, their captain, so a bit of a watch, but we'll just have to see how that one pans out.
Yeah, we'll have to see. All right, so that wraps it up for today's episode of Zero Hanger TV. Thanks, Mitch.
Thanks, Felix.
Don't forget, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and catch all the latest AFL news at zerohanger.com.